coming to FedTalks again in Federal. It's great to see you all. Always want to thank the FedTalks team, Mick, Mike, Susanna, who's come on board with the Facebook social media thing of late. So you can follow us on FedTalk Facebook site if you need to keep up with what we're doing. And of course the whole mob for doing the tea and coffees for us every time we do a FedTalks. That's great. Thank you. Thank you to all those people. And thank you for coming. And thanks, of course, to our speakers who are both very busy women and for making time to come tonight to Little Old Federal. Very quick introduction. First of all, Mary Graham, born in Brisbane, and there's a lot to celebrate about Queensland at the moment with what's going on in politics there, so it's great. Born in Brisbane, grew up on the Gold Coast. She's a long and distinguished academic career in Queensland universities, specialising in Aboriginal history, politics and comparative philosophies, which is really why she's here to talk what we're going to talk about tonight. She sat on the boards of many committees and many boards and many local and state and national Aboriginal organisations. So we're very, very lucky to have her here. Melissa Lukashenko, another Brisbane-born girl, has been widely published as a novelist and essayist. She helped establish the organisation called Sisters Inside, which is doing some great work advocating for human rights of women in our criminal justice system. I'm not sure if you're still involved in that. Yeah, it's fantastic. Above all, they're just great conversationalists. They're people that believe in keeping the conversation going, which is kind of what FedTalks is about. So we've got a great partnership here tonight. And I didn't tell Melissa, but I stole something off her website, which I thought sort of said it all.
You'll be hearing from my lawyer.
Well, actually, I hope you asked the person you got the quote from, because I'm stealing it. An American writer called Barry Lopez said, "We live in a period in which the conversation of anything is disparaged. The conversation of books, the conversation of darkness, the conversation of ideas. It all gets very short shrift in contemporary society." Not here in Federal. I hope you enjoy the evening. Thank you.
Thanks, Alan, and thank you all for coming tonight. Aunt Mary has asked me to acknowledge the fact that, of course, we are on Bundjalung land, and I pay my respects to in particular to the Arakwal elders and community, as well as to elders both Indigenous and non-Indigenous here tonight. And want to express my gratitude, I suppose, for being able to be here and speak to such a good-looking audience.
That's different. Lovely.
How would you like to start, Aunt Mary?
I'll acknowledge too. I'd like to acknowledge the Bundjalung mob down here. And the elders and all the ancestors of the local mob who I've met over the years. Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry. Okay. And I'd like to acknowledge the elders of non-Aboriginal people here too tonight and in this region. As Alan said, I was born in Brisbane, but I grew up in my father's people's area, the Combamary mob down the Gold Coast in Southport. On my mother's side, she was a Waka Waka person. That means she was nearby, like Gayndah. I don't know if people know of a place called Gayndah, 300 or 400 k's northwest from Brisbane. She came down to Southport when they got married. This is sometime in the depression years, sometime in the 30s anyway. And so she spent the rest of her life there, but would occasionally go back to Cherbourg, which she knew as Baramba, actually. So I have relatives all basically around a lot of southeast Queensland, really, on both sides. And on my European side, my mother's father was English, and on my father's side, of course, it's Scottish with a name like Graham.
And for myself, Lukashenko is obviously Ukrainian. Anything that ends in Enko is Ukrainian. My father's first language was Russian, and my mother's Aboriginal ancestry comes from the Tweed, and she also has some Irish mixed in there too. And I just want to acknowledge my Uncle Frank in the audience there, who's come along and very kindly brought us all some bunya nuts. Who likes bunyas?
Yes.
Oh, I thought I could have them all.
There'll be a sellout then.
So just grab one or two or a small handful on your way out if you'd like to share the bunyas that Frank has kindly brought along. And bunya is a Waka Waka word, possibly.
Is it? Oh, I don't know. Sorry, I don't
I'm
know.
not sure. How far south does Waka come? Would it come down to the Bunya Mountains?
I think it does, actually, yes.
Yeah.
It's very important. What's that place? Blackbutt
Ranges,
the Ranges, yeah. It comes down to there. That's what I've been told.
Yeah, that vicinity anyway. And in Bunya, the name comes from the word in that language or the relevant language, bonya, meaning good. So the actual name for the food means good because it's such a good food source, such a rich source of calories. Yeah. So, do you want me to start by asking? Yeah. Aunt Mary and I were having a bit of a yarn this afternoon and talking about the talk tonight, what it means to care for country, how identity is linked to country, the ethics of caring. And something that I asked, it's a bit forward of me to ask it, but asked it anyway, was to ask how in Mary's own experience has knowledge of caring for country been transmitted down the generations. Because each Aboriginal family has a story, as Wesley Enoch, Brother Wesley says, we've all had removals, or we've all had the massacres, all been touched by these things, or all had harsh colonial practices affect our families in some way. So no Aboriginal family is exactly the same, but each Aboriginal family shares a lot of context, historical context. So I asked Mary, in what way does caring for country, who taught you, I suppose is the simple way of asking.
Thanks. I guess who taught me, of course, first of all, was mother and father, immediate family, and of course, by extension, then all my the whole kinship system, really. So when you grow up in a Aboriginal family system, and we were very lucky actually that I don't remember ever coming across any of our lot that had been taken away, stolen generations.
Which is quite unusual.
Yeah, very unusual actually. But there were the usual number of massacres and so on and so on. And in the back of Burleigh Heads, there's a place called Blackshoot Creek, which a lot of the original mob were taken and shot and thrown into a bottomless pit in a creek, I think it was. And the sign is still there. So those things that happened pretty well across the whole country, they happened there too. And after those sort of particularly dangerous sort of days, our lot, anyway, started to intermarry with local whitefellas. Mainly on the Gold Coast, there was English, Scottish, and German, actually, German settlers. So over the years, as I was growing up, I learnt a great deal about what land means. Now, not in the sense of somebody sitting you down and telling you a whole long story. There were stories, but very short, and not necessarily about how important the land is, But there were various things like the men would go out, what do you call it, crabbing, you know. And Aboriginal people didn't go crabbing on the coast with crab pots. They used long metal by that time, hooks, very long sort of piece of wood to which a metal hook was attached, and they would pull up what they needed actually. So that was done very carefully with reminders of people who were doing this by the guys who were doing this by older people, of being very careful about not getting any too young, you know, not getting too many, and just being careful to look after the actual crab hole, because it would be there after years actually. It would actually be there and come back, and it was really like actually the beginning of, like, it was like takeaway really. If you felt like mud crab, you could have mud crab. Yeah. When you just felt like it. Of course, oysters and.
So it's an ethic of conservation.
It's an ethic of conservation that you don't realise it's an ethic of conservation actually, because it's just sort of life, you know, as you're growing up, and you're overhearing these things and you don't really know what they mean in the broad sense, but then you realise, right, that's what it really is, you know.
Which is classic Aboriginal culture, isn't it? Not to be shown, not to be sat down and preached at or pontificated at, but to be encouraged to observe.
And that's so important, that particularly of learning to be your observational skills. And again, you don't realise that it's so important when it's being done, because nobody is sort of like, you know, hammering you or lecturing you or anything like that to do that, but you are told, and I do distinctly remember being told, you know, look, just watch this, watch that, or watch this. You know, my father was, he wasn't a bad, he was quite a good carpenter actually, and he worked on the local Gold Coast City Council, well, Southport at that time, for a number of years. So he would be doing all these sorts of various things, you know, the fishing and the crabbing and the making things and fixing things and so on, and you were expected to be, you know, observing all these things. And you weren't encouraged actually to ask questions, actually. Nobody said don't ask questions, but you would be told more or less to just watch these things, you know, watch what's being done, watch what's happening, really. And again, I realised too that this had a broader meaning about the whole of life, really, not just growing up and, you know, becoming more mature and so on and so on.
Which gets back to what we were saying this afternoon about autonomy.
Autonomy, yes.
I mean, you spoke about the 4 ethics of Aboriginal philosophy, in a sense.
Yeah, yes.
Or am I putting that wrong?
No, that's right. I have to say that it's just I've been trying to write some stuff myself over the years. I went to University of Queensland. Sometime in the 70s, I think. Before that, some of the first jobs I ever had down here on the Gold Coast was cooking hamburgers, you know, cleaning motels and toilets and so on. But I always, and encouraged by my father, because in the household we always had at least one shelf of books which he read, which he read, and I guess that was very encouraging for me, you know. And I do believe that when educationalists say that when they say, you know, if books are in a home, anybody's home, any society, you know, that's always encouraging, especially if you see your parents read. And so I saw them both read.
So he was in the vanguard then of that transition in Aboriginal culture from the valuing, like the intense valuing of knowledge.
Yes,
you know, we
absolutely,
traditional society valued knowledge more highly, I think, and I could be wrong, more highly than material goods.
Yes.
Probably on a par with relationships.
Yeah, definitely.
And these days, you know, that's written knowledge, that's web knowledge as well. It's
yes, he some of his favourite things to read were usually things like biographies, really. And I noticed that. And again, he didn't say anything about now read books and do this and do that, you know, and take notice of this. It never said anything like that. But I did notice what he read and who he admired in the mainstream society. He admired people like, Fidel Castro. He admired people like, I can't think of his name now.
Tito?
Tito, yes, Marshal Tito. It read his whole life story, and he also admired Abdel Nasser, you know, one of the presidents of Egypt, the guy who started the Pan-Arabism. And it never occurred to me that this was anything special, that, who are these people, you know, I don't know. But I learnt by the time I was in my teens that there was... all those people, regardless of what the Western opinions about those people were, they're people who stood up for their own mobs, they fought for their own country and their people against enormous, overwhelming forces. You know, so I knew that that's what my father admired. So that told me a lot. You know, and it's funny. He was very quiet fella. You know, very quiet, and very musical family. And my mother was just the opposite. It's amazing how people meet. You know, couples meet. You know, she was just the opposite. Loved singing and laughing and dancing and arguing and so on and so on. He was, you know, very quiet. But she read too, although not like that. Anyway, I learned a whole lot from that early beginning, and it set me on a path to finding out how things turned out in this country. Really, now it wasn't from a point of view of like lucky, really, of hating whitefellas or nothing like resentment or anything like that, even though you'd hear these things. They'd never tell you directly terrible things, but you'd overhear all the adults talking about terrible things. Not all the time either. This is all in amongst singing and dancing and so on and so on, and getting full and so on. So anyway, I wanted to find out a lot more. So I started to read. I started to read when I was still in high school, even when I was in primary school, always a member of the library and so on. And I thought, well, what's the best way to find out, you know, about people, the different cultures and so on and so on. I thought, well, I don't know many, so I started reading things about what those sort of history books, but especially poetry, philosophy, and politics, and a whole range of things, besides novels and things like that. And one of the very first things which I'm grateful for that I read when I was about 16 was Voltaire, actually. And Voltaire said, what I picked up from Voltaire was to doubt, actually. I thought I was lucky to read him first, you know, of whitefellas, so as to doubt things. You know,
that's scepticism.
Scepticism,
yeah.
Yes.
Which comes back to autonomy, doesn't
That's
it?
That's right, yeah. And then from then on, I just started reading a whole lot. So all along, there really was a sort of a double path of learning from my own Aboriginal family and relatives, and then later on friends when I came up to Brisbane from Southport or moved to Brisbane, and at the same time reading all the time, but never bothering to go to uni. I was still sort of working in restaurants, and I was a chef for a while. I was not very good, I'm afraid. I burnt the meat, you know. Yes.
When I first encountered you, Mary, in the 90s, I think we were both working for Fairer at the time, although I'd heard your name previously, of course. I was struck by the fact that you lived in Southport and you travelled up, I think on the train, several days a week to work in Brisbane, but you would always go back to Southport.
Yes.
And you've since said to me that almost all your life you've lived on your own country.
Yes.
Well, you said two things. You've almost always lived on your own country, and secondly, that in your family you've had this experience of not being taken away, and that profoundly changed your attitude both to country and to the dominant society.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
Yeah, it gave me an idea about place, that place was extremely important. That's place with a capital P. And it also gave me an idea about relationality rather than survivalism. And when I was examining or looking at other cultures, not just Western, other cultures too, and looking at, say, logics of different, when I was looking at comparative, looking at philosophies, I was looking at not just the West but the East too, the Chinese. So Greek philosophy and Chinese philosophy. And I thought, we are so old. We are so old. We must have our own philosophy. And it is. There's some very good writers, anthropologists and so on, and a philosopher actually, have written about Aboriginal philosophy. Not many people know about it, but I thought I'd have a go, you know, at it myself. So there is such a thing as Aboriginal philosophy, and it's essentially, and I think this is a key thing to having a different view about what land means and what human relationships mean and what relations between humans and land means. So ours, roughly speaking, is, won't go into it too much, but ours, roughly speaking, is that all perspectives are valid and reasonable. Because if you've ever seen an Aboriginal
I didn't catch
map,
that, Mary. Could you repeat that?
Sorry, all perspectives are valid and reasonable. So it goes something like this, that there are multiple, if you've ever seen an Aboriginal map, a language map, if you're familiar with it, every part of the country, every part of the whole continent, there are countries, 300-400, they usually count them alongside the languages. Do you know what I mean? So 400 or 500 languages. So that's how many places there are clan groups. So it goes something like this. Every place has a dreaming story. So there are multiple places. So every place has its own dreaming story. So there are multiple dreamings, actually. That means really Genesis, you know, like a Genesis. Really, it's more complicated than that, but basically, for the purpose of here, I'll describe it as that. So there are multiple dreamings. A dreaming is the law, L-A-W, a natural law system. So there are multiple laws from across the whole country. And a law is the truth for that place. So there are multiple truths. There isn't one big mother of all truths. There are multiple truths. And a truth is simply the perspective from that place. So there are 400 or 500 places. So there are perspectives from all those places. And the equation works out something like that all perspectives are valid and reasonable. So it's very, very different from Western philosophy, which is essentially Aristotelian logic, you know, either or, anything beginning with either or. It's a dual kind of idea. You're either right or you're wrong, or you're alive or dead, you know, and so on and so on. But in Aboriginal language, logic, it's completely different, So it's not the logic of the arena, Aboriginal logic. It's different again from Chinese logic, which is a logic, paradoxical logic, actually. Paradoxical logic. They go in this kind of, what would you call it, fluid sort of way. If you've ever seen that symbol, you know, yin and yang, black and white, it's a curvy sign and a bit of black and vice versa. So it's very fluid. It's not a hard approach of either or. So the acceptance of, complexities, what did I say before? Inconsistencies, contradictions.
Paradox.
Yes, yeah, that's right. They accept all of that in that logic, yeah. And there's some really good writers I can tell you about later if you want, who can explain that, a comparison between Western and Chinese. And Aboriginal logic is different again. That's all, yes.
I was just going to say how, is there a similarity with Aboriginal logic there, or is it quite different to the Chinese?
It's closer. Aboriginal logic is here, Western logic is over there,
yes.
And Chinese logic is about a bit closer.
Okay.
Because they do accept, and it's very hard in Western logic to accept inconsistencies and things like that. And
because there's an end point in Western logical reasoning, isn't there? Whereas in limited grasping would suggest that in Aboriginal logic or philosophy there is no end point that you're trying to get to.
Yeah, there's no absolutism for a start, and they do accept inconsistencies and uncertainties, which is very different from the West. The West can't stand it. Uncertainties, they want certainty above all, you know, both in logic and in economics, of course. So they'll do anything, you know, anything at all. And you see this, and that's what I saw in all this trying to understand Western logic, Western philosophies, and looking at Chinese too. But one thing that really struck me was because of that logic, that's what I think I see. Well, I'm saying this, I'm not saying it as trying to not be so adamant about it, but it's like there has to be a winner, basically, in the end. And that's the only way you get a certainty, you know. And people fight for that certainty.
Fight for the right to say what is real and true.
Yes. Yeah. Well, actually define what is real and true. My very good friend Lila Watson, she coined this term about who has the power of definition. She posed it like a question: who has this power of definition, really, in the whole world? And it's essentially the Western intellectual tradition, really. You know, that not I don't mean just in science, you know, calling things by their Latin name, that sort of thing, but in a whole range of different ways. But I think from our point of view, which is why we don't ideologise our conflict, is that we tend to see any other kind of logic or any other kind of opinions as being, well, it's just one way of looking at it, actually. Do you know? It's one among many different ways of looking at it.
There's a kind of standing back, isn't there? There's a hesitancy to judge.
Yes, it's very... with a logic like that, the beauty of a logic like that, I always think, is that it suspends judgmentalism. But it doesn't suspend judgmentalism permanently or forever, because you can't, actually. It can't be done. Because judgmentalism is built into our skin and our genes.
And there's also a law that has to be enforced, isn't there? There's social order must be maintained.
Social order must be maintained. It can't be like, oh, well, if you get rid of judgmentalism, everything kind of is just whatever people feel like, you know. And but what I always think of as the genius of Aboriginal thinking is they combine that particular kind of logic with a custodial ethic of looking after something outside of themselves. And seeing something that has great intrinsic worth in and of itself, but also as a key thing in the relationship between humans and land and between humans. And so you have to have that. You can't have that logic on its own, standing on its own. You have that logic in partnership with a custodial ethic, and then that's how you get to have a society, a very stable society, over eons of time. And there's a whole lot of other arguments that people might want to bring in. Oh, well, if you want to be really, really racist, well, you know, here's this, what do you call it, the classic old-style anthropological view of Aboriginal people as being a primitive hunter-gatherer society struggling to survive in a harsh, cruel world. Now, if I were a cool person, I could take that apart quite easily, word by word, you know, term by term, because that's the last thing we are, actually, is primitive or anything like that. Actually.
Even hunter-gatherer, as Bill Gammage has shown in his book, The Greatest Estate on Earth.
Greatest Estate on Earth and Dark Emu by Bruce Pascoe. They're a must to buy.
Yeah. And I think your story at the beginning... went some way to encapsulate the managerial ethic, Mary. You know, when you go crabbing, you don't just go crabbing. You go crabbing and you look after the hole.
Yes.
So that the next time you want mud crab, the hole is intact and the crab is there again.
Yes.
And this isn't hunter gathering. This is farming. You know, Bill Gammage. People have read Bill Gammage. A few of you, highly recommend his book, because he understands and he lays out beautifully that Australia was a giant farm managed by many nations, and that's no exaggeration to say a farm. And there's a line in his book that's just beautiful. He says, after 1788, kangaroos went wild in Australia.
Yes.
And he's dead serious,
true, yeah.
and he's dead right.
Absolutely, yeah. People think of it as a pristine, untouched kind of a country. It's hardly that.
Yes.
Hardly at all. Especially when you haven't been, here is a group that's been in the place for tens of thousands of years. Every square inch of it has been touched, basically, but looked after. And that's the other thing of having this particular custodial ethic is it's an ethical system that's built into the society, and I always call it ethics 101. You know, it doesn't come from ideas. It doesn't come from religion. It really is. It does come from what you do, actually. So ethics, from our point of view, from our perspective, is what you do, actually, not what you think or believe in or anything like that. Because it's very easy, you know.
Not what you say.
Definitely not what you say, because people can say anything they like, you know. But you have to look at what they actually do. But so I've been trying to put some things together like this about the importance of relationality rather than survivalism, seeing the world as something where you just merely survive and you use everything, including wheels, and bigger and better technology, where technology is always at the service of survivalism and so on. And it's not even quite often a survivalism of everybody, it's survivalism of certain groups, isn't it? You know, over thousands of years, it's always been like that, you know, and so on.
I remember, Mary, and I quoted this in an essay I wrote about 10 years ago and it was called Survival. I was asked to write an essay by pen on the topic of survival, and I don't think they got what they were expecting somehow.
Yes.
I quoted what you'd said to me many years ago in Brisbane, which was, in your gentle way, you said, you know, when white fellas came to Australia, lots of bad things happened. But the worst thing, it wasn't the murders, it wasn't the rapes, it wasn't even the theft of land. The worst thing that white societies brought was this idea that life was about survival, about suffering and clawing out an existence in this place, because that ran so counter to the managerial, sustainable, joyful ethic of life that had been here before. But they imported this idea of the outback, which had to be survived, and the bush that had to be survived, and this hideous existence that the convicts obviously had, and the soldiers over the convicts had as well, and that has still seeped into modern Australia to a large degree, and until Aboriginal people have taken it on board sometimes.
Yes, that's true.
Which is a tragedy.
Yeah, they have, yes. I think that's the way to, you know, and even worse, as we saw today, well, not saw today, but, you know, some very good papers have come out about neoliberalism. There are neoliberal Aboriginal people.
Yes,
you know.
yes.
You won't believe it, but it's terrible. I know, well, that's their choice.
Yeah. Yeah, it's anyway. A crying shame. And it's easy to break something down. It's difficult to build something up, isn't it?
That's right, yeah. Well, I think people really have... I mean, do you remember there was an old... in protesting, there's been all kinds of posters, and there was an old one called "We Have Survived," and that meaning it in that, you know, against colonialism. But I think a lot, well, I don't know about a lot, or some people took it to heart. Is that, oh well, this is what it's about, you know, and so on and so on.
Yeah, and Kim Scott, actually, in Western Australia, the novelist, writes really interestingly in the latest edition of Griffith Review about how the warrior ethic, which has been so important for Aboriginal people, needs to be complemented by a different ethic, lest we get stuck in that conflictual mode. And he's been quite brave in saying that, I think.
He is, yeah, that is brave.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Because, well, we're a lot of Aboriginal people all over the place. We've all talked either together with other people in writings and talks and so on, and at universities and outside universities, you know, in the community, through the communities, between communities. And it just seems like what we need to get back to ourselves is a sense of our own ethics you know, because we did and do have our own ethics. The land is a moral entity itself, you know, and if we can see that and actually start to build something around that. I'm not talking about nature worshipping or anything like that either, because this is the other brilliant thing I think about Aboriginal people, is that they have this brilliant... Oh, sorry, I'm so hot.
Has anyone got any tissues handy?
Tissues?
Or hanky?
Oh, hanky. I haven't even got that. Oh, actually, I might have more. I've got some else.
There's a hanky.
Oh, great, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Victor.
Thank you. Is that the system, a social system, and this is what I've always been really interested in, mainly from the point of view of organisational principles. So, of course, I've always been really interested in politics, political philosophy especially, about what makes a good society, what makes a stable society, you know. And as I've gradually over the years, you know, found out a lot more about our own old system, it seems clear that our own old system is not hierarchical, because the spiritual notions about it are not hierarchical. So what I have found in years and years talking to different traditional mobs is that even though there are tens of thousands of Christian Aboriginal people now, the old thing is that there's no hierarchy either in a spiritual sense either. So no God, no heaven, and no hell at all. That's an enormous thing when you really think about that, do you know? So, but without going too much into the whole spiritual sort of thing about it, what that means is that the social and political structure we have is not hierarchical. So, unlike the early colonialists trying to impose a kind of, you know, a kingship who will, on different Aboriginal people, usually the guys. So you'd have King Billy and Queen something or other. And all that was very foreign for Aboriginal people. So it's more of a lateral system. It's a lateral system, not a hierarchy. And the closest thing to a hierarchy, an authority, are older people. But the amazing thing is, which I sort of gradually learnt in my own, not through university, but I learnt it in different ways, is that the people don't rule. You know, in a sense, they govern. We are stuck with a government at the moment who know only want to rule, actually. They don't want to govern. In fact, they don't know how to govern. But they love ruling. They love ruling, don't they? And you can hear it in their language and their announcements and conflict and so on and so on. But the old Aboriginal sense is that what they did was, I think they worked out this contradiction. They've never, where the West, I think, and many other cultures, not blaming the West all the time, but the resolution of this conflict, this contradiction between what authority is and what power is. And I think many old cultures, ancient ones and up to now, of course, is that power is the thing you go for. And they have conflated these two things, that if you have power, then you have authority. But what we said, I think, is that power and authority are two different things. People who have power are people who are deserving of having this, authority, and that's the more important thing to do. And sometimes, occasionally, the people who have this authority have to exercise some power. And that is sort of diffused, though, too. Diffused power.
And the whole system...
You know, it's a brilliant system when you really get to understand it, you know. But it's been interfered with. It's not allowed to occur in many places around the country. And, of course, it's been forgotten in a lot of areas. But it's brilliant because it allows for an ethical basis there. In fact, it doesn't work. There's no authority if there's not ethics there. And that's what... You know, a lot of people are sort of starting to... I've been on the Ethics Council of the National Congress recently, but it's been using power. It's been basically cut off at the knees, really, funding-wise. This is the last experiment in Aboriginal representation, really. And on the CSIRO's Ethics Council, I've been on that for a while. I just recently got off. So I'm very interested in that ethics from the point of view of to do with the political system, and organisational principles and so on. I think everybody, especially the West, but us, our lot too, have to get back to seeing where that is, not survivalism, which allows for terrible things to happen, the treatment of our people, plus the asylum seeker children, it's unbelievable. Sorry, I'm getting all mixed up. But this whole contradiction between what power is and what authority is, that has yet to be worked out, I think, in a lot of, in the world at large. The other thing I want to say quickly was...
Take your time, please.
When you see that map, just think about, if you can see it in your head, this Aboriginal map. It's all nicely coloured and all that now. And, of course, it's a white fella's map. It's a... what's his name? Tyndale. A guy from American, I think. I think he was American in the 1930s or 20s or something. He came out and made it, created it. But it's based on a reality, a real, genuine clans in those areas. That's what it's based on. What you're actually looking at in a modern sense is actually a multipolar society. We actually invented that too, along with inventing art, astronomy. We invented that too, apparently.
Ethics, government.
Yeah. And burials, apparently. The first sign of human life, human society is having actual burials. And the oldest one is in this country. And the oldest representation is in this country, apparently, too. But it's a multipolar world. It's a lateral world, actually, where there's no hierarchy of someone ruling someone else. The idea of, say, the attractions of unification never happened here because of this custodial ethic of people having a place and living a flourishing, stable life in their places. Please get the anthropological view of the native, the happy native, out of your mind. It was actually quite very, very complex and very, very far-sighted, actually. And very grounded. Don't get the idea it's all lovely, wise people and so on and so on. Very grounded. Accepting of, I know it sounds crazy, but accepting of conflict and a very keen understanding of human psychology, as we're finding out at the moment, actually, where I and a good old colleague and sister of mine, Lila Watson, we work with the psychology department out at the UQ about basically Aboriginal people's understanding of human psychology and other things like that are going around in other unis, I think, too. So there was that understanding of how much, that you can't do without a certain amount of conflict. So if somebody wants to say, anybody, white anthropologist or black anthropologist or very, black fellows who, that we all lived in peace, that just wasn't so. We didn't live in peace. It was a stable society, nevertheless, but they had different managerial ways of handling conflict, of managing conflict, so that it didn't get too much out of hand. So, no arguments and conflict about someone taking over someone else's land. So, nobody attacking someone else. The very idea of invading someone else's country is inconceivable. The idea of unification is inconceivable. So
and that in itself is a very, very difficult idea to believe or grasp from a Western viewpoint. The idea that people didn't want to invade other people's territory and take it over and enjoy the spoils in that country. And yet if you actually look at Aboriginal government, Aboriginal management and Aboriginal religion, this is true, because the spiritual system that was in place tied people so closely to their own clan's land that it was literally unthinkable that you would even want to live on someone else's land unless you had to go there for marriage reasons or something like that. You would travel there. But it's kind of like the best analogy I can think of is you wanting to own someone else's body.
Yeah.
Okay,
Right.
me, Melissa, my body's what it is, you know, but that person over there is much younger and fitter and, you know, healthier, and so I'll just own their body instead. It's ludicrous from a Aboriginal philosophical and religious point of view.
And please don't think it's to do with it's kind and it's virtuous and or that it's moral. It is moral. There's a moral basis to it, but above all, I know it sounds crazy, but it's efficient actually. That's the beauty about it all. The system. It's an efficient system.
In what sense?
Well, because it stays stable for a very long period of time.
So peace dividends for thousands upon thousands upon thousands of years.
And it's an investment in the fact that everybody has worth. In a lateral system, everybody has worth. In a hierarchical system, the only people who have worth are at the pointy end, aren't they? You know, at the pointy end. They're the ones who have real worth. Even children don't have worth because they come down that hierarchy a bit, do you know? There's men up the top. And I hate to say it, but it's mainly white fellas at the top. And people of other cultures, women are down below, children are down here.
And animals.
Do you know what
right
I mean?
at the
It's a
bottom.
whole, So, and the gophers are on the bottom, workers, working class, lumpen proletariat, whatever you want to call them, servants, serfs, they're all down here. And of course people of other cultures, you know. I hate to say that, but I don't like saying things to like but it sounds like it, I know. Because I also think of it in a logic way. If you were in a part of the world where you suffered for the last 10,000 years, say, never-ending invasions from your neighbours, revolutions, invasion after invasion after invasion. You know, you've seen those archaeological digs on TV in National Geographic or something, Discovery. And they dig down in one old ancient city. It's about 2,000 or 3,000, 4,000 years old. And they discover there's other buildings underneath that. And that's about 5,000 or 6,000 years old. Then they go further than that. And that's about 7,000 or 8,000 years old underneath. So people have actually just stayed there, which is also another thing about place, actually. That tells you a lot. But quite often they come from being invaded by their neighbours. Do you know what I mean? All across the Middle East, Europe, and everywhere. And of course, Asia, everywhere. So therefore, if societies have had nothing but invasions, after a while the logic says that invasion is normal. But here were a group here who had said that invasion is not normal, actually. And which is a strange thing in the context of the whole world. And a deliberate thing, as Uncle Bruce Pascoe in his book Dark Emu explains, that I don't think he put it this way, but basically, again, a claim that sounds a bit ludicrous, sounds a bit far-fetched, but he says that Aboriginal societies invented peace. Because of the way Aboriginal government worked in this country, Aboriginal parliaments worked in this country, Aboriginal diplomacy happened in Australia. But I think we certainly did invent diplomacy. Because that is extremely important, and people misunderstand the whole thing of. Quite often, a New South Wales politician said a couple of years ago, I think, about how what is it? What's the use of all this? Welcoming and acknowledgements. You want to get rid of it. It's all, silly stuff basically. But what he didn't understand was, in itself, it's very, very useful because what it does is maintains peace. Actually, it doesn't make peace, but it maintains peaceful relations. So we keep doing it, and after a while, it becomes a habit. And that's the whole thing about both protocol, peace. Ethics. The real point is not to have ethics as a great ideal to attain, but to make them a habit, actually. So you have ethics as a habit. It's like what Wittgenstein said about language. He said, don't ask for the meaning, ask for the use. Yes. Don't ask what a word means, ask how it's used. How is it used? So don't ask what diplomacy and peace looks like. In a post-colonial environment. You might have to look pretty hard to find it. But what's happening on the ground? What do people do, not what do they say? I'm just wondering how we're going for time,
Does anyone, Alan there or? Okay, sure. All right. Maybe
Yes.
bring it back to what people, Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people can do now in 2015 in terms of caring for country, because how do we put these ethics into action? What would that look like on a local, state, national, international level, maybe?
After having said all that, I don't know.
I'm sure you do.
Big noting and then I don't know.
I don't believe you.
I don't know. I just... Well, one thing I do, actually, I have to say, there's an experiment that I'm engaged in at the moment. Well, it's a research project with actually a young... researcher from Lancaster University, actually. He's got this idea
Which
about...
university, sorry?
Lancaster,
Oh,
north of England,
Yeah,
I think.
okay. Yeah.
And he came up with this idea, which I thought was just mad at first, as I told him. But after a while, I sort of understood what he was meaning. He wanted a group of North England people, like Geordies there, actually, like Newcastle, and a small group of Aboriginal people here to get to know one another. And so it sounded at first like some mad sort of around the world kind of cross-cultural thing. I thought, who's going to pay for all that? You'll never get money for that. But his idea was to look at the idea of precarious living, precarity as a noun, and good society. How do you achieve good society given precarity too? And he's talking about it in a very broad view, from the outcome of colonialism in this country, of course us, but also those terrible austerity policies that are very, popular, well, with the EU and in the UK, and our very own captain, is trying to bring them in here, aren't they? They love it, don't they, Joe Hockey? They love it, austerity. Good
They
for
sing
the
about
people.
it.
They sing about it, yes. Yeah. And of course, all they're looking for is looking after that at the pointy end. That's good. Austerity is good for that pointy end, not for everybody at all, So you make the most vulnerable, poorest sort of... So what his idea is people getting together and actually not just sharing culture as such, but looking at the strengths of culture, each culture too, not just saying ours is the best or anything like that, although he says they would probably learn a lot of things from us, do you know what I mean? But we are learning more about Geordie culture, English culture too. So certain things that are far away from the hierarchy in London, do you know what I mean? Far away from that. How people have maintained contact with each other, and, good relations. How do you save that in the middle of precarious living, really, which is going to get worse and worse. So it's a very interesting thing. Now, just taking that on board, I know an immediate question would come from Aboriginal people, probably, I'm sure, would say, well, why don't we, as a group of blackfellas, talk with white Australians about things like that straight off, do the same thing. Actually work out policies, good policies. Because one of the points of it is the people that these policies impact the most never get asked their opinion about anything, whether it's blackfellas or poor whites or, do you know what I mean? Vulnerable people. They never get asked anything, their opinions. So that's a part of it too. So, but back to that, why don't we just sort of get together with white fellas and do that here? The problem is, it's not saying that would never happen, but the problem is that one of the elephants, or the whole herd of elephants that would suddenly be in the room, would be colonialism, of course. Yeah. And a lot of people, both black and white, can't get beyond that. It's very hard. Maybe because it's only 200 years.
Do you think place can overcome that?
Place
eventually.
Yes. Yeah. See, place is the thing. Because I gather this place is really important, and everybody living here, they love it. They have I don't know, I'm guessing all this, but I imagine a spiritual relationship with this place. I don't know if there's traditional owners here, or I'm not quite sure. I mean, if they're still living here, I don't know if there's a relationship between the two. But the starting point, and the English colleague Matthew, he says that too. That place, and we were just talking about that on Skype last night. How important place is actually, because I'm not saying it's not the answer to all things, but it's the best starting point, because we've got nothing else actually, haven't we? Do you know what I mean? What if the economic systems changes tomorrow? I don't know. Might get a different government too. The climate change is getting worse, and so on. We'll have to collaborate and cooperate. We just simply have to, and somehow can't allow. I'm not saying don't talk about it or don't bring it up, or I'm not saying ignore it or anything like the whole thing about the history of colonialism. I'm just saying, yes, just acknowledge that it's there, and then talk about looking after the place, putting into allowing this to become like a blueprint for the relationship with each other, and so on and so on. I just think there's no blueprint, and I have no intention of kind of having a blueprint, because that's where everybody goes wrong in the first place. Don't have blueprints. Have gatherings, have talks, have arguments. That's what blackfellas do. Have rows, and have a general idea that, well, what really matters in the end is looking after land for future generations, and nothing else matters really. Really.
I'll just invite everyone to just sit for 20 or 30 seconds and absorb that, and then anyone that wants to comment or question, have a little rant.
Yes.
Sing.
Yes, rows. They're all right.
Yeah.
It's all right to have rows.
But let's just sit for a short minute and try and collect our thoughts. Okay. Who's the brave first one?
Yes.
Say a bit more about land being a moral entity.
I'll just repeat the question. The question was, could Mary say a bit more about land being a moral entity in and of itself?
Well, there's several aspects to it, I guess. Is that land is the thing that keeps us alive, basically. If we weren't standing on land, we'd be hovering in space, or falling in space, I suppose. So it's the most basic thing of all, In our position too, from our perspective, land is the thing that has also invented us. It's created us. It's thrown us up. Do you know what I mean? It throws us up. That's why it's very interesting if you want to hear some different stories. There's not enough time to talk about different stories, but it's very interesting as far as, what do you call it? Evolution goes, So land has this very basic meaning to humans. Over the years, though, thousands of years, for many people, and not just Aboriginal people, many Indigenous around the world, of course, too, but a lot of other peoples, cultures, simply come to see land as like the backdrop, especially in the day-to-day economic, political kind of sense. It's the backdrop, it's the wallpaper, actually. Or it has aesthetic worth only. Do you know? It's a beautiful view. And the best places with the most beautiful view are taken up by people who can afford it, of course, So land has become, you know, as we all know, has become property, real estate, and so on and so on. Sorry.
No, I'm interrupting.
No, yeah. I was going to say that it's the basis of relationality too. It sort of says something like this, that there are only two relationships in existence that has real intrinsic worth itself. The relationship between people and land, and then the relationship between people. And the relationship between people is always contingent on the relationship between people and land. So depending on how you want to treat other people, how you treat land, is actually how you'll treat people. Do you know? So it's seen as a kind of, what do you call it, like a blueprint or an exemplar, a natural kind of example like that. Also, it's the place where you, out of this idea of looking after land, and it doesn't mean necessarily like we'll all run around and become full-on extreme conservationists tomorrow, you know. It's seeing land in this as a spiritual entity. And again, that doesn't mean turning around and worshipping nature, you know, worshipping land, or in fact, there's no worship in a non-hierarchical kind of cosmology like Aboriginal people have. There's no notion of faith. It doesn't exist actually, you know, and you don't worship anything at all, you know, and everybody has worth. But the relationship, and this is where the relationality comes into it. The relationship has to be based on some kind of weaving in or of your existence with land itself, because that's the thing that makes you human. In ancient, in some old Bill Niji, you know.
Oh yeah.
Bill Niji, The Story of Feeling. You probably picked that up in a second-hand store. Bill Niji, he's dead now, a senior lawman from the Northern Territory. He wrote this book. Well, it was his words in it. Tiny little book with a purple cover called The Story of Feeling, and Kakadu Man, I think, and things like that. But the thing about feeling is extremely important. It says that land helps us to be human by awakening our feelings, actually. So land and feeling makes us human. You know, that's what he's really saying. I think it's good psychology too. You know, so you're looking after land. It's efficient in this way. You're looking after land. You're looking after yourself, not just in the sense of you'll have clean water. It's good for the future generations and stuff like that. It's actually helping you to become it's like a full human being, a full human being. Do you know what I mean? And trying not to be, don't get religious about it, you know. Avoid that at all costs, you know. It really is common sense and efficient stuff. It really is, honestly. So, yeah.
Was there a question?
I don't know if that's, yes?
I think someone over here had the hand up. And then a lady at the back.
Okay, we're there. Yes, I was very interested in your comparison with the fluidity and flexibility of Aboriginal thought and the rigidity of European stuff, because I think there's a close parallel in that between commons and enclosures.
Yes.
Centuries ago, England was really a vast common with small bits of private land. But starting about 1600 and peaking late 1700, early 1800, there were vast numbers of enclosures, and Act of Parliament passed to enclose land. The commoners were sort of compensated, but many of them were drifting off anyway. But having lived the first 50-odd years in England, I was very familiar with the commons. You know, there are bits of common all over England, and people have a right to walk on those, use them, very often a shared use. I was a commoner at Ashdown Forest before I came out, and I could take firewood and bracken, but there were tennis courts and villages and pubs and things all over the common. But what came out to Australia was not the idea of common land, shared land, but the idea of enclosures, of fences. And this, I think, has seriously restricted the attitude to land that has existed since 1788. So,
Yes, I obviously don't know it as well as English people, but this only going by what I've read and what young Matthew has told me, the young researcher I work with. And I try to, some excellent writers in The Guardian, UK Guardian, George Monbiot is one, it's one of my favourites. He's wonderful, isn't he? He has written incredible historical thing about the whole thing, about the wealth that came back into England, into the UK, but also Europe and so on, and how, because they can't do that anymore, that's part of the reason why they make, well, not just going broke, but they're squeezing their own people, basically. They're squeezing the wealth out of their own people.
Yeah,
because
I mean? The economy has to squeeze someone, so it will find someone to squeeze.
And the Americans have always done it, but it's becoming just, that's the way it's done now. You know, I don't know if people have heard of Piketty, a young French economist, Piketty. He's got some very interesting ideas.
The Nobel Prize?
I don't know. But he's saying some very interesting things about capital, about capitalism, basically. Yeah. Anyway.
Lady down the back.
Hello. Yes.
Hello.
Mary, it's wonderful to hear you speaking about Indigenous organisation, the lateral way of doing things, and what the initial invaders definitely missed out on. But I like to think about our shared history reasonably often, and what really starts, I thought you might have something to say about this, the naming of places. It seems to me that sometime, or on many occasions during our shared history, there was a negotiation that was related to the people at that place being asked what the name of that place was, and knowing from a little bit I know about Indigenous people here in Australia that there were many names. Every part of a landscape had a name. So, yeah, I'd love to know there's somebody doing research into those moments, those times when negotiations seem to actually happen, even if it was just for a moment. Between Aboriginal people and whitefellas, you mean? You're talking about in history? Oh, right, yes. I don't know. I guess some... I think people in their own areas quite often do that research, eh?
Well, it depends which part of the country you're talking about too. A fellow a year or two back did a fairly, a reasonable job of recording massacre sites in Queensland, and couldn't possibly have got them all because, for example, just in the Byron, Ballina area, there's at least 24 massacre sites that I know of, and I don't know them all. Anyway, this bloke wrote them down in Queensland, covered a wide area, spoke about how I think it was the Jardine brothers in the Cairns area were murderers, and yet esteemed historical figures in the north because it's been covered up or hushed up. And he tried to get that history told in a particular area, or he was asking about stories in a particular area in central or North Queensland, I think central Queensland, and the people at the school, I think it was, went, oh no, you don't want to talk about that stuff because some of those, that family has grandchildren or great grandchildren here, and no, we don't want to know about that, and we certainly won't be using your book. So people might be doing the work, but it doesn't mean it's always going to be well received, of course. Because the further north and the further west you go in Australia, the closer the frontier comes, you know. But even in Queensland, you know, Kev Carmody, who's 60-odd, he's a Vietnam War veteran.
Yeah,
his uncle was, I can't remember the exact words, but basically taken out the back and shot in southern Queensland, I think it was, around Warwick maybe. So you're talking about history that isn't always far away. And it's certainly not far away when you're talking about the impacts on our families. People are doing lots of language work around the country, lots, and that's great because when you recover language, you recover culture in very interesting and intricate ways. But yeah, people are increasingly going to have to look at first contact, I think, or continue to delude themselves.
Yes.
Yeah. There's one down the front here and another one down the front here. And Suzanne, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Well, I'll say them out loud.
Mary, my name's Sarah Jane. One of the things that I'm becoming more and more aware of is that caring for country is in our generations, our younger generations. When I was in 3rd grade in primary school in Sydney, I did Aboriginal studies, but we never did anything after that, and we certainly didn't do anything in high school. And so that's nearly 40, odd years ago. Is there a lot of movement in bringing studies back into primary and secondary schools other than just universities?
Look, I'm to tell you the truth, I'm not quite sure now because I think it's sort of different all over the country.
They tried in the national curriculum. It had a lot of Aboriginal content.
Oh, they did. Yeah.
And Lisa Wadio and a whole heap of people did content creation. This is for the national curriculum that was supposed to be implemented, and then Abbott stymied it somehow, or either stymied it or watered it down. And one of the people who reviewed it, I think, was Professor Trigg. Is it Trigg? From Sydney Uni, the poet, who was in that scandal a few months ago about using, incredibly racist and homophobic and sexist language. And this is a man who's, supposed to look at what's suitable for being in the national curriculum.
Good God.
Yeah.
Truly. What happened? Is that the same thing we're talking about? Is the what was his name? Ken Wilshire was one, and the other guy.
Ken Wilshire was involved as well. May still be, for all I know.
Oh, and the other guy was that Trigg?
Trigg, yeah. They're both advisors. I think Wilshire headed it up or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I think.
So it's gone nowhere, has it?
I don't know if I'd go that far.
Oh, right, okay.
But there's certainly resources that have been produced now, but whether they get used in schools is a different matter. Yeah. But, maybe Australia's changing. The demographic is changing. It's not as white a country as it used to be. Maybe it's not as self-deluding a country as it used to be. It'd be nice to think so. And, you've got to look at history, because 40-odd years ago in Queensland, a big part of the Aboriginal population was still locked on reserves and missions and basically couldn't get out, couldn't enter white society freely. That's a very short time. And, and...
People carrying cards, what do you call it?
Yeah,
under the Act.
pass cards.
Yeah.
And this week, not to be Pollyanna-ish about it, but this week an Aboriginal woman, Leanne Enoch, has been created as the Minister for Housing in Queensland. So, yeah, today.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And, she'll have a big job ahead of her, of course.
Housing, God almighty.
But,
housing,
yeah.
Housing is terrible.
Yeah.
It's terrible. Gee, that's good.
Yeah. Patchy, I guess, is the answer.
Yeah.
The lady down the front.
Hello there. Thank you both for being here and speaking with us about such profoundly important things right now. And I'd like to ask if we can take it back a little bit to talk a little bit more with everyone about the importance and the relevance of language and land together, the importance and how they go together. Yeah. Thank you.
So the question was to do with how language and land go together and work together.
I'm not very good at... if my cousins were here, they've actually served to save language, actually, not just our own, Yugambeh, on southeast, over the border, but on the large, the national kind of language, saving it. But I'm not quite sure how you mean.
Yeah, what I'm meaning is I've heard so many of my teachers, Aboriginal teachers from farther north, up in the Daintree and the Bloomfield area, talk about how the language and the land go together with the culture. And if you take the language away, then the people lose the culture. You take the land away and you separate the land and the language, and the people lose their power, they lose their will, their connection. Yeah, that kind of relatedness. And you're talking about how the language is coming back now, and there's a lot more language being taught again, and in little bits and pieces, because I don't believe that there is a lot of, in the southern end of the country, there's not a lot of people speaking fluent language, as there is in the Kimberley and say up north and
South Australia is not bad.
Yeah, and they've apparently got one of the best language programs happening at the moment.
Yes.
And that just rang really strongly for me, that as white people, we have more of an understanding of how important these things are to awaken the memory in the DNA of Indigenous people to feel strong and to be able to step forward in a knowingness of helping us to find a better way to live together. And one of the other things I just want to mention that I feel we really need a lot of help with is learning how to respect our elders. We all need to learn this in our culture.
Definitely.
Your children understand that. Your little babies understand the importance of that.
Yes.
And we've lost that.
So it's important not to romanticise as well, though.
Yes, that's true.
Our cultures are very damaged in lots of instances, in most instances, and in Aboriginal tradition, there's a place for everyone, there's a value for everyone and everything. And as Aunt Mary was saying before, it's a flattened hierarchy where age gives status and authority and youth does not. But, you've only got to go to the streets of Lismore or Casino, I'm sure, on a Saturday night, and you'll find people who have little respect for elders.
That's true.
So it's important not to get too romantic about the reality on the ground. As far as language goes, there's a lot of language reclamation in the south, and you're right, there aren't a lot of fluent speakers. There are fluent Bundjalung speakers in the, outlying towns especially. I'm not one of them. I've got a big vocabulary of Yugambeh and some Bundjalung all jumbled up together because I've lived in both areas. Yes. And it does give you, it gives you pride and it gives you information, because language encodes very valuable information. However, I think it's important not to fetishise language, particularly if you haven't got it, because it can be seen as this gaping void that where I don't know if I'm misrepresenting what Mary was saying before, but I study Zen Buddhism as well. I'm a student of Zen, and there are some loose parallels with Aboriginal spirituality and Zen. And as an Aboriginal person or as a non-Aboriginal person, you can appreciate the beauty in a stream, the value of water in a stream. You can feel the softness of a possum's fur. You can feel the rain in March and know that it's going to be very different to the rain in December or the lack of rain in June, whether you have words for those things or not. Right? The words have value, but it's not the only way to understand country, I suppose.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say that, yes, that's absolutely, yeah. I wouldn't take it really, how can I put it without knocking people who do say that? Well, I wouldn't say that if you've lost your language, you've lost your culture, you see? Because there's over 500,000 Aboriginal people in the country, and a lot of people still say, you know, they are Aboriginal people. Do you know what I mean? They don't say, I'm a black Australian or anything like that. And a lot of them haven't got their language, you know. So you have to be careful about saying things like that. But just language itself is very incredible. Some of the things you...
I think it's true to say that we've lost something when we've lost language. Otherwise, we wouldn't be trying to reclaim it and we wouldn't value it. But to say it sweepingly that you've lost your culture ignores the way that Aboriginal English has come into play, and it also ignores the capacity at the margins of English to express Aboriginal concepts, you know. Not all the time, but sometimes. There is some common ground, because once everyone on the planet was Indigenous.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
And maybe again.
Yeah. Just a curious thing I thought it always fascinates me, just some things of languages. In Aboriginal languages, apparently, this is what, I think it was Jeannie Bell. Jeannie Bell is an Aboriginal linguist, that it seemed to be no word for thank you. No word for thank you, but there was a word for something like, this business is finished, this is it, or this is done.
I think in Yugambeh, it was, I might be misusing it, but there's a word in Yugambeh, Kingalawana, and wana means no.
Right.
And Kingalawana, I think that the book says it, no, I think it just says a finished or at an end. No more. No more.
No more, that's right.
Yeah.
Yes, it's
Kingalawana.
At the end, yes.
Yeah.
And I thought that was very interesting, though, not to say even just like thank you. But I thought it was also interesting that there's, while there mightn't be a straight word for thank you, there is a word for uncouth behaviour, actually. Very much, you know, there is uncouth behaviour. So somebody being very... well behaved, you know.
Okay.
It's really good.
Suzanne, are you going to say something? And then after that, I might finish up. My voice is starting to go.
Actually, yes, there are some comparisons. I'll start off with that first, and then I'll mention about some of my North Queensland experience. Okay. The first one is about Maori. When you were talking about philosophies, it's the same in Maori. We don't have an end. Because it's all going, it's ongoing, it's one. It's actually very, very closely connected with land and sea for us. You know, 'cause
us too.
All that area is really important. We're seen as one. There's no hierarchy in that.
No.
But having said that, Maoris can be very hierarchical. There is a thing about who your ancestors are and have been.
Yeah.
However,
chief system with Maoris, huh?
Yes,
yeah.
but relationships on who you're married to and stuff. However, no matter who becomes chief after the chief, if he's not a good leader, they don't just dismiss him or have election or anything. They just don't follow him anymore. Yeah. And he just doesn't become the leader anymore.
They sort of withdraw his authority.
Yes.
They withdraw.
Well, it's not even withdrawal. You know, you can't... If people are not going to listen to you and they find someone else who's much better and a better leader and they follow him no matter who he is or her, it could be a woman.
Yes.
And it has been, it's a bit of both. Then they'll just follow them. So there's no sort of battle or war over it, although Maoris love war. That was their second thing, was their war nature, unlike I suspect that Aboriginal wasn't the same.
No.
Well, there was.
I know they had some battles.
There was conflict.
Yes.
But it, for example, there were warriors, but it wasn't a warrior culture. Actually.
No.
You know, so it wasn't a hierarchy in that sense. You know.
Yeah, because Māori.
Because you certainly have a row.
Yeah, well, there is. You know, you not all Maoris. You have in a iwi, which is made up of a different load of tribes. You know, the same grouping. You know, usually with all related. You know, not quite intermarried. And you would have a group in that iwi, which would be the warrior people. They're the ones that went off to war, and the others would be more the farmers, the fishermen, who preferred that, you know, choice. And the warriors weren't just the men; they were young teenage girls as well, or after having had their children, may go out and go with the warrior families. But it also differed with each tribe. None of them are the same. And even the language changed slightly, depending on what area they came from. So that's, in a way, similar, but we didn't have that, you know, there definitely was hierarchy.
Yes.
Yeah, different culture. Yeah.
Different type of culture. But as I say about leadership, there was no battle about that. If they weren't a good leader, you just didn't follow.
I see.
Okay.
Thank you.
And on that note, maybe we'll... Sorry, am I cutting you off, Suzanne?
Well, I just wanted to say about my experience of Aboriginal people not wanting to be on other people's land. I had this, my friend, when I came down here, and my friend was coming down with two women from North Queensland, or from Kuranda actually, to Granny's. And she said, "Oh, Sue," she rang me up, she was in Brisbane, "they're having a terrible time, they can't sleep because it's not their place. They don't like being, you know, elsewhere." And she said, but Granny, I think it was Maggie or someone, she said, "You've got those birds, Budgingella, haven't you?" And I said, "What's Budgingella?" And she said, "They're the pied spangled drongos or something." She said, "Oh, that's her relations. She calls them her family bird. I heard them at your place. Can I bring them down to stay the night?" And I said, "Yes, of course, naturally." And the minute she got there, and it was funny, these birds came from everywhere, and, you know, I hadn't seen that many around my house before. They were all there. And she came out and sang to them, and she said, "I'll sleep better tonight. I'll be able to talk to those important people now." But that was the thing. She really couldn't. She really didn't want to come out and leave Cairns. She couldn't go to another, you know, place. They just don't. And, you know, she felt she didn't
Not without
belong.
being invited.
Well, that's right.
That's right.
And even, you know, even then, she just felt that she was not, it wasn't right. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think, Alan, is there anything else to be done or said, or will we just... like I said, there's bunya nuts at the front, courtesy of Frank. Please take some, and I'll let Alan close.
Thank you, and sorry for those few hands we didn't get to. Thank you very much, Mary and Melissa. It was fantastic, really informative and very interesting. And you can, a lot to catch. In a day or two, we'll have it up as an audio on the Facebook site. And just before they leave the stage, while I've still got your attention, keep an eye out. Our next talk will be in May, and it's on fixing... Sorry. Our next talk will be in May, and it's on climate change. So we'll get back onto some other topics then. Thank you very much.